Today, most of us are focusing on issues related to the pandemic, to go out or not to go out, to mask or not to mask, to get vaccinated or not vaccinated. But young people, our school-age kids, still have the same pressures and concerns as they did prior to the pandemic. One major pressure our kids still face is drugs, the pressures from peers, and finding ways to avoid drug usage. I'm Donna Holland. I teach sociology at Purdue University, Fort Wayne. While teaching juvenile delinquency, several students shared some of their experiences related to drug usage and avoidance. As a result of these in-class conversations on the drug exposures kids face, we decided to share some of the insights from their experiences. We have an amazing group who will share their experiences with drug exposure. Before we begin to discuss the important topic of drug usage, let's get to know our panelists.
I'm a senior studying human services at Purdue Fort Wayne. Growing up, I was pretty lower middle class, and as I got older, my family transitioned into standard middle class family. I grew up on the south side of the town where I'm from, and hopefully in 10 years I will have my own volleyball program.
My name is Lexis, and I'm a senior at Purdue Fort Wayne majoring in sociology. I'm not sure where I want to end up with in my career, but I definitely know I want to help people, especially children.
So my name is Cameron. I am a senior psychology major. My career goals are I want to go on to be either a family or marriage counselor. And I would say I grew up in a relatively middle-class community and went to a relatively middle-class high school.
My name is Lindsay. I am a senior in college studying criminal justice with a minor in psychology and a minor in sociology. My goal is to be a probation officer for juveniles.
I am Casey Lupkin, and I am a first-generation college student. I went to public school, and I grew up with a single mom.
There are so many ways that kids have their first experiences with drugs. What are some of the ways that you had your first experience with drugs?
One of my earliest experiences with drugs involves a close family member. I was in an apartment with my siblings and my father, and the police raided the house. They searched the entire house, asked me and my brothers if we knew where anything was. My dad was on the ground in handcuffs. From this early age experience, this kind of began my mistrust with police because of the manipulation kind of that me and my brothers experienced by the police to kind of betray our dad. So this was one of my first experiences involving drugs.
I've kind of always just known about drugs. I can remember my earliest exposures to like the smell of weed, or the first time I ever found it, I actually flushed it down the toilet when I was really little. And as I got older, I started to understand more of the harder drugs.
My first situation relating to drugs was when I was a senior in high school. And I was after school, it was after school hours, and I was helping, I'm pretty sure I was helping with an event. And while I was there, there was a group of the more popular students that I didn't really hang out with, and they were trying this new drug that was trending at the time called the Juul. And as I was walking past, they asked me, hey, try this Juul with us. And I said, no, I don't want to. And they were like, oh, come on. It would be cool if you did. You'd be cool if you did it. And before this situation ever happened, I had been told, you know, peer pressure is a thing and look out for it. And before that, I'm like, is it really though? I never really was in a situation until this situation happened. So as they were constantly trying to encourage me to try this drug, something hit me, and I was like, you know what? I told them, I'm gonna go use the bathroom. So I walked away to go to the bathroom, when really what I did was go to the closest exit door, and I ran out. And I ran next door to the library, and I waited there until my mode of transportation drove up to pick me up.
Growing up, I was a very sheltered kid in a very small town and didn't know what drugs were or what they really even looked like. When I was 16, I went to an amusement park with my cousin and her boyfriend, and it was about a 3 to 4 hour drive from where I live, and we left really early in the morning, so I was half asleep. But then I woke up to the most overpowering smell I had ever experienced in that moment. And it was my cousin and her boyfriend smoking weed. They asked if I wanted any, and I had to decide whether to join in on their fun or be lame. And I chose to be lame because I knew what they were doing was illegal and they were driving, and I wanted to be aware of everything that was happening. So all in all, it was choosing to have fun or stay aware of my safety.
The situation that I was in, while it was the only situation that I felt exposed to drugs, it made me realize that peer pressure is a real thing, and it's not something that the teachers and adults in our lives tell us to look out for. It actually does happen, and I think because I was in that situation, it didn't faze me, it didn't stop me. I believe it made me stronger and helped me get to where I am.
Can you share an experience that you had later in life?
So I want to talk about the first time I ever got high, because it was actually a pretty good experience. I was hanging out with my boyfriend and one of his friends, and we were driving around. It was this old Thunderbird. We liked that car back then. It was a nice car. But so we were just driving around, and my boyfriend's friend, looks back to me and he's like, "Hey, do you want to get high?" And I actually, up until that point, I did not smoke. I didn't like it. I did not support it. But it was weird when he asked me. I was like, okay. So we drove around for a little bit, and we ended up going to one of his friend's house. They were women. They were really nice. We went inside, and that was the first time I ever smoked weed. And it felt really weird. Like, I felt like I was kind of dreaming, actually. But at that point, I didn't know where I would end up going with drugs.
One of my later experiences with drugs was my senior year of high school. I was at a party on a Friday night, and normally there is marijuana and alcohol at the parties, but that didn't seem to faze me or any of my other peers as much. A new group kind of showed up to the party. They were from a different high school, and they brought out cocaine, and they asked me to do if I wanted to join them, and I said no, and they didn't really understand why I wouldn't want to do that, because I would drink alcohol and I was at these parties every weekend. So I had to say no. They asked me multiple times, and I basically had to say I don't do the hard stuff, and that was enough for them at the time. This was something that they did every weekend, starting at that point. So I did have to say no. Things got violent between them, and I realized that that is not what I wanted my energy to be like after doing a drug.
When I got to college, I went to a party, and it was just a few people, so I didn't think it would be very crazy, but it got bad fast. When me and my friends walked in, there was alcohol, which was normal for any college party, big or small. Then after about an hour, the girl that lived there started smoking weed and asked if we wanted any. And we all said no because we were already kind of on edge, and I could already tell that I was going to be the babysitter for the night. Then after some time goes by, the girl comes out to where we were, all standing with a grinder and a bag of Xanax. And she crushed about 6 of them and snorted them off the counter while her friends hyped her up to do more. Then I made my friends leave because I knew it was not going to end well. So we left and ended up coming back for no reason, but when we walked in, the girl was in bed, shaking and throwing up, and I didn't look because I didn't want to see that, and I had the choice to make, to be that person and call someone of authority to come help, or to just leave. And due to being able to make smart choices and know what's best for myself,
I didn't know that I would get into harder drugs. I didn't even really smoke very much after that. Up until high school, that's when things got a little bit darker for me. I started becoming more self-aware. I was working, and I got emancipated when I was 17, and so I thought I was grown. I figured I can do whatever I want. And so at that point is when I was smoking weed every day. I was barely going to school, but it seemed justifiable because I still had straight A's, and like the other students would get very frustrated about that. But I would go home and I would just you know, I'd go to work and then I'd go home, I'd get high, and then I would do it all over again until, I don't know, I guess at one point I just kind of snapped and I quit everything. I quit going to school, I quit going to work. All I kept doing was getting high every day, and at this point it was still just weed. At one point, before I quit going to school, I actually got suspended for going to school smelling like weed. They knew I was high and I got in big trouble for that. My boyfriend actually got expelled for that too. And I know they were just trying to scare me at the time, but it actually made things a lot harder. So when my boyfriend got expelled, I felt like I got him in trouble, and that really changed our relationship. And at the time, we were living together. Like, you know, we were trying to be that perfect couple, but we ended up breaking up anyways. And I mean, looking back, I can say that that was a good thing though, because he never ever got any further than where he was then. And I, at the time, got worse actually though, because of everything that happened. It was like, I got in trouble at school, then I stopped going to school. I broke up with my boyfriend. I let him keep everything. So I was kind of just homeless for a while, and I was couch surfing, and I don't know if it would be like the depression or what, but that's when I would say I turned to the harder drugs. So even though I had completely gave up on school, I still held on to my friend circle. I thought they were the only ones that really cared about me, and it's not that they didn't, but when you're on drugs, the only thing you really care about is that drug. And so I didn't realize that these friends of mine were doing those harder drugs until we got really close. And it was at that point when I watched my very best friend shoot up heroin. Like he did this whole thing with the belt, and it was a trigger for me. I was actually really curious, but I still got angry and I left. It was months later and when I actually tried it myself, and I snorted it, and so somehow snorting heroin is better than shooting it up in my mind. At the time it was, and I was probably 19 at the time when I started going down this road. Now, I want to go back though, because before that happened, I was already doing like Vicodins and Percocet for probably a couple years, and even in high school I was doing that. So it leads up into this whole, now I'm doing heroin every day, and that's all I cared about. I was chasing it. It's the only thing I needed. I had to have that every day to be able to function in my life. And I mean, my addiction with heroin didn't last too long. It was probably 6 months of everyday usage. And then after that, I met a new guy and everything was going good. I can't say that men should inspire you, but he was a clean guy and it helped. So I got sober because I saw this future with him and I saw myself getting better. I had this new job. But then just like that, I had a bad day and I overdosed and I was found dead on the floor. And if someone didn't find me there, I would be dead. So when I woke up, I had all these people around me that cared about me. My boyfriend was holding my hand. And yet I was angry that I had been woken up. I was angry that I got taken from the best high of my life. I was angry. I hate to say that that's what it came down to at the time, but I was just really angry. And it wasn't until later when I started getting that, okay, you literally died on the floor, and now you have been given this opportunity, this chance at life. So I got back on track again. And at that point is when I was like, okay, I'm getting to my late 20s. I think I want to start college. So I had been sober for a while, still drinking quite a bit. We'll get to that. But at that point, this was 2018 when I finally said, okay, I want to go to college. I went to Ivy Tech, I applied. This has been a long time coming though. I've always been a student that cared about school. So I applied, I got aid, a lot of aid, I was helped. And that was another blessing. So I took that, I went to Ivy Tech, and I can't tell you it was easy. If it was easy, everyone would do this. It's not easy.
Drugs are often associated with bad outcomes for kids. For example, drug usage is related to relationship problems, criminal involvement, and loss. Let's hear some of the panelists describe the kind of losses they experienced because of drugs.
With drugs comes loss, obviously, but I think a lot of people oftentimes think of death when they think of loss by drugs. They think of overdose, maybe a bad batch of whatever drugs the person is doing, but sometimes it's just simply the loss of a friend or a family member. My loss that I've experienced is my two brothers who struggle with addiction, and they are still alive, but they are not the same people anymore that I grew up with. Another loss that I have was a close friend in high school who did Percocets throughout high school, and he did get a bad batch, and it was laced with fentanyl, and that involved actual death. I don't know which one is worse, whether it's the person actually dying or the person just not being them anymore, but they are both definitely very difficult.
Personally, I have experienced loss because the relationship between my cousin and the story, that's completely gone. I look at her completely differently because she was the person I looked up to, but now it's completely lost due to her bad choices and hanging out with the wrong people, trying to get me involved in it. I don't want any part in it.
When you lose someone you care about to drugs, that can have a variety of meanings, and one of the meanings is actual death. I've had a lot of friends die from this, fentanyl, heroin, meth even. They are dead now, kids that I grew up with. Another way that you can die is when you completely turn into another person, and that's what happened to my best friend, the one that I used to do a lot of these drugs with. It was like he stayed on the path when I didn't, and I'm not friends with him anymore because that's not my friend. I can't say it any other way than he's dead to me because he's not my friend. He's been completely immersed in this drug, consumed by it, that he isn't himself.
I would say I lost a few friends because they focused more on doing drugs. They focused more on smoking marijuana because they believed that was that's cool and that's where their life is. They didn't go on to higher education, whereas I did. And I don't want to say I flat out said we can't hang out anymore. It was more so we drifted apart because they went down their way and I went down my way.
Other people I know have lost family members, and that takes a huge toll on their life, and it is their family. So that's people that they love that they're not going to get back due to drugs or alcohol.
One of the key goals of our project here is to give information and insight to parents. We will now hear some of the panelists give their recommendations to parents.
The straight A student could still be the one that's struggling. I know that because I was the one. I cared so much about school, but I still had a lot of things going on in my head, and no one really noticed.
My message to parents would just be whatever you think your kid is not being exposed to, they most likely are. I did go to a private school in the city that I live, and most of the drugs that these kids were doing were drugs that their parents would oftentimes talk about kids from other schools doing because they assumed their kid was not doing that. So whatever you think your kid is not doing, or the problems that they probably don't face, they most likely face those problems and those pressures that you're not expecting them. Be understanding for whatever your kid does. If they do come to you or you catch them doing a drug, come to them with love and not so much judgment, because I guarantee they probably didn't want to do that drug in the first place.
Another huge thing to parents is being open about your past, because nobody is perfect. And when you're a little kid and all they say is, don't do drugs, drugs are bad. Okay, come on now, you have an experience with drugs. Tell your kid the truth.
To have a relationship with your kids that's strong enough that they feel like they can come to you with literally anything. And so that way, you can be aware that if something if they are exposed to drugs, then they can come to you and you know the situation completely and you can take control of it and help them through it.
The person who is doing the drugs isn't the only one affected by the drug. Being on that drug is going to affect the entire family system, because you have people wondering if you're going to be okay, or wondering, are you ever going to be able to come out of this, or where are you going to sleep tonight? It's affecting the entire family system. Sometimes when a child is struggling with addiction, the parent might just single out that one child and maybe even neglect the other children because they're so concerned with this one child. And again, it affects the entire family. Or there's even situations where we're looking at the wrong child. Maybe this other child is really the influence and we're just catching this one at the right time. And so a lot of times the whole family needs to be getting counseling or therapy, not just the one person that we think has the problem.
So my message to parents would be, prepare your children for these situations like I was in, because I think if students and if children know more how to handle these situations, they can get out of it. Because if they're not taught, hey, when you're in this situation, make up an excuse to get out of it, it could lead to even more dangers in their lives. I would also say pay attention to who is in your child's life. They could seem like a good person, but what goes on behind closed doors? And finally, think of your child's future. Are you posing a threat in their life? Are you doing the best you can to make sure they have a successful future, or are you shielding them from that?
Listen to them. You might think, oh, those are baby problems. Okay, to you they might be, but to your baby, they're huge problems, huge. You don't really know what it's like to be a kid in the digital age because you're not them.
Because our panelists have recent experiences with dealing with drug usage and exposure to drugs, let's hear what they have to say to kids today who are facing this problem.
So the first time I heard this little quote, I thought it sounded so cliche. I was like, yeah, whatever. But it actually stuck with me. It really stuck with me to this day. And the quote is, show me your friends, I'll show you your future. And it really is a lot deeper than I thought it could ever be, because I took that path with my friends, and now I couldn't say I have one real friend. Well, I have one real friend that I kept through high school because we both got sober together. And other than that, all the other friends, you can't keep them. That's some of the best advice I can give is to go through your phone and delete every friend that can either give you hard drugs or just puts you in a bad place or uses you for something. Get rid of them. They're not going to help you in your future.
My message to any kids who may be watching this, what you do does not define you. If you have an experiment with drugs one night, that does not define you. That doesn't mean that you have to keep doing that. Another thing would be if your family is doing drugs a lot and that's kind of the culture and the atmosphere that you grow up in, that doesn't have to be you. I feel like oftentimes it is you because you feel like that's the path that maybe your parents take, and so you need to do that, but you don't have to. And if you do, you are capable of getting out of it. It's just going to take a lot of strength, but don't let your family atmosphere define you, and don't let the decisions that you make when you don't know anything define you.
Wanting to escape was one of my main reasons for getting high and drinking and all of those things that I've done, wanting to escape for a little bit. But as an adult and getting better, I've learned that there are other ways to escape, much more productive ways. Bicycling, this might sound a little cheesy, but bicycling is my thing. I can ride 25 miles at a time, and it really gives you an addiction that's healthy.
What I have to say to the children that are exposed to drugs today, it might seem cool, it might seem awesome, all your peers might be talking about how it's the end-all be-all thing, but from experience, the thing that matters is having a degree with your name on it. That gets you somewhere in this world.
Some things that I've done that have helped me is, especially with struggling with addiction now, dying was enough for me to quit heroin, but I struggled with a lot of other things, And to be able to stop doing that, recognizing your triggers, which would mean writing down, like say you smoke cigarettes, writing down what time you smoke. Like, okay, 8 a.m. I smoked because I woke up. 10 a.m. I had my coffee, I smoked again. I did that for a couple days, and I can't say I quit completely smoking, but it really helps to be able to, okay, what makes me smoke? What time am I smoking? It's holding yourself accountable. Find a cheerleader. You only need one. It only takes one person to believe in you to make you think you can really do something. My favorite one, video games for therapy. I wrote a 20-page paper on this. Video games are excellent therapy. If you just need to get away and be alone for a little bit, play your game. It's healthy to a level. Don't, do it for I can't say don't play for 12 hours because I even do that, but it's still healthier than drugs.
I would want juveniles to know that it's okay to say no. You're not being the bad guy, you're actually being the stronger person in the situation. And if you are exposed and you do try it, it's okay to get help. And whether it's your parents or your school counselor, anyone is there to help you through it.
Be realistic with yourself, because you don't just wake up one day and go from overdosing on heroin to a college-educated woman. It takes time. It really does. I would be lying if I said it was easy. Again, if it was easy, everyone would do this. The thing is, it's possible. It really is possible. I'm sitting here today doing this.
Because we have heard so many stories now about the problems that drugs have caused, let's hear what they have to say now about their current situation.
So, I specifically want to mention heroin because my experience with heroin, although tragic, was an extreme lesson for me. I realized there's so much more to life than that silly little drug. And that's really what got me. That overdose is what made me wake up and go, okay, this is not going to work. And I had to change. And it got me here today. That was over 5 years ago when I overdosed. And now I graduated with an associate's degree and transferred to earn my bachelor's degree. Although I can say I'm undecided in my major, I'm still on my way.
Even though I was exposed to drugs at a young age, I am now a senior in college and ready to graduate and start my career and help children get through things just like drug addiction. And even though it may seem rough trying to get through drugs in that moment or saying no, you can make it as well.
I graduated high school and I went on to college, and here I am today in my final year of undergraduate study, and I plan to go forward to graduate study to get my master's degree and become a family or marriage counselor. And even though I was in a situation that if I would have gave into it, I wouldn't be here today, I didn't let that stop me. And even being exposed to drugs, saying no got me here, and if I can do it, anyone can do it.
As I mentioned previously, what you do and what your family does doesn't define you. I'm currently a college student. I'm a senior. I graduate in just a few months. I'll be the first person in my family to go to college and get their bachelor's degree. So that doesn't have to be you. And if it is at some point, that doesn't mean it always has to be you. I have definitely made mistakes, but I've walked away from situations, people, family members even, and I've gotten the strength to do my own thing and make my own story.
Juvenile drug usage is associated with bad outcomes for kids. Scholars often study the drug crime cycle, but what we can generally say is very clear. When adolescents use drugs, they are at higher risk for committing other crimes. So it is incumbent upon us to be concerned about juvenile drug usage and to help deter or stop drug usage among juveniles. 1.9 to 2.4 million of the minors in the juvenile justice system have substance abuse or addiction issues. Drug usage is a family problem, not just a teen or individual's problem. We need to understand that family plays a role in starting, intervening, and stopping juvenile drug usage. We cannot expect to help juvenile drug users by only focusing on the juvenile. It takes a family systems approach because it affects the entire family. Our panelists have shared some powerful stories of drug usage. Our goal is to provide hope to families and communities. If you are a juvenile who has been exposed to drugs, remember you too can make it.
Because these messages have been so powerful, we really just want kids to know today, you too can make it. Hi, today we're going to be talking with Dr. Hile from Smith Green Community Schools in Churubusco. So thank you for joining me.
Yes, thank you.
And I appreciate you taking your time out of your busy day to come over here to talk about this really pretty important film that some of my students have put together. And so what I would like to see is, as you know, you've seen the film, I've seen the film, and if we can just kind of take some time to reflect on the messages that the students had in that particular film related to drug exposure, recommendations to parents and family, and the other kind of content that was in this particular film. So I'll just kind of remind you of how it came to be. In my juvenile delinquency class, we just had some students who were talking about experiences with drug exposure, and we decided that we should take it maybe to the next level. So of course, having conversation about these topics is really important. I think that's step one, but then what can we do with that? How can we put it into action and make these ideas come to have more play in maybe helping kids or helping schools or helping families? And so that's kind of the motivation behind the whole film, is to take something that has happened that's not so good for somebody and seeing if we can help people who've had similar experiences with how to deal with it, for example. So what was your kind of initial reaction when you saw the film?
So when I watched the film, probably my first takeaway was just that I know it took a lot of courage and bravery for those students to share some of those stories, because some of those were very personal. They shared some details and some things from their lives. Some maybe affecting others that they knew, and some affecting them themselves. And that, I know that's a difficult conversation, you know, working with children myself and with students. Those are tough conversations to have. And so that was very striking to me, I guess, that they had the courage to do that. And as I watched the entire film, was really moved at the end by what the students had to share as far as their recommendations or advice to others who maybe have someone in their lives and they may not even realize that person is having a challenge, whether it may be with drugs or possibly just other things, which could be a gateway that would lead them to try substances. I thought that was very, very interesting and very powerful as they reflected on that and some of the advice that they gave to others.
Right, so one of the topics that sociologists always study, right, is anything that has to do with the social problem. And so in my field of study, we study issues of drugs, you know, from selling drugs, recovering from drug addiction, exposure to drug at a young age. And it's very challenging. Most of the scholarly research that we do is hard to translate into action in a simple research article, because say we have like 25 pages, we have to write everything about how we conducted the study, and we have just a tiny bit of space really to say how it can be used. And so this is one of the things I really like about this project, is that it's actually designed to talk about how can we help people, you know, help kids who are currently possibly exposed to drugs, and help kids who might potentially be exposed to drugs in the future, as well as their families. So one of the topics that was discussed was the issue of loss. I felt that was a very meaningful, the entire message they sent was really very meaningful, and the different ways that people experience loss. So I know you're in charge of the entire school system, and so you're going to have these kids in your school system that have somehow been touched by, if you will, the just drug exposure issue. And so when you think of loss, as the students in the interviews highlighted, one of the ways was by loss of friendship, loss through death. That's the first thing that most of us I think of when we talk about loss and drug exposure. And then loss because people change. They change how they are. They change how they are living, and so they become kind of someone different. And so that relates again to a relational loss of someone. So when you think about school policies or school interventions, kind of creative thinking, really, if you will, how do you think schools could address loss for students? Because it's probably not going to be the kind of loss that's announced.
Right.
You know, that a parent's going to write a note in and say, could you, please be a little bit more understanding of my daughter or son because we've experienced a death in the family.
Right.
That's a certain kind of loss, but it might be these other ways people are experiencing loss.
Yeah.
So how do you think that this could translate into something that school systems might be able to consider?
So as I watched that part of the film, actually, there was another kind of loss that I think we see even a little more at school. And I think this was kind of indirectly maybe touched on by some of the examples they shared, but from my experience, one of the things that we see a lot of that kids go through is almost a loss of their own childhood and innocence too. Even if they obviously at that young of an age are not using drugs directly, if there's drug use in the house or something going on, something is being lost over that time because that child is experiencing things or maybe not experiencing things that many of their other typical peers are. And so, and that's hard to detect, that's hard to know. One thing that kids are good at is masking and putting on what they think the adult wants to hear and see. There are some students who are very open, but there's probably just as many who they don't want people to know that something's wrong. And that's understandable, that's human nature. I think we all do that to a way. And so, but to answer your question, at our school district, we have tried very hard over the last 5-10 years to build out systems to try to encourage students to share if there is a challenge going on in their lives. We have devoted increasing amounts of resources each year to bring in mental health therapists to be available to our students at no charge to families. We always found that while families may want to have those services, the cost or the transportation would get in the way, and so we've had a very serious commitment to bringing those services to the schools. So as long as a parent or guardian is comfortable signing and giving permission, the student can access it right there at school. Those solutions I think have had a strong benefit for many students. I think a lot of students have benefited. Of course, the concern always is we are still addressing the symptoms and we are reacting. It doesn't all, the issue is still there. We're just trying to help the child on the back end. We've talked a lot about if there would be different ways to reach families, provide training, support, services. That just gets very difficult from our seat, of course, though, because the parents don't come to school and they are not a part necessarily of us. And unfortunately, when we've tried some things in the past, parents may or may not really be receptive to that. For a variety of reasons. They may be busy, they may be embarrassed, they may be struggling themselves and not know what they should do. But we're still hopeful that we can continue to do that because obviously, ideally, no child would be put in that situation in the first place.
Right, so I love this idea of having the counselors available right there in the school system. And so what it makes me think about is how can we kind of provide those kind of services, maybe through the school like you're already doing, but also making it more available within a community. Because anytime we go into a school, I think, we're putting on as a parent, right? You're going in, you're representing your family, if you will.
Right.
And so it becomes a bit, you use the word masking, but we're doing some kind of front stage performance.
Right.
And I mean, not necessarily every parent, but we're putting on the best show we probably have in most cases. So we might not want to expose ourselves to school personnel to say, we have these kind of problems. So how do you, I guess I just want to highlight that. So it might be too that we might need more publicly available counseling services that are either free or low cost. What do you think about that?
No, I think you're right there. And in fact, just recently we had a conversation with some of our county leadership out in Whitley County about that very idea of, in what ways can we continue to reach families outside of the school setting, provide training, resources, help, what have you for families at home, and not just for drug issues, for a variety of issues.
Right, well-being overall.
You know, a saying that I've heard folks use in the past that I think is very true is many parents are doing the best with what they have.
Right.
They love their children. They are trying as hard as they can to be good moms and dads, sometimes grandma and grandpas. But at the end of the day, not everyone has the same access to resources or have had the same experiences that have gotten in the same place. And so we try to be very cognizant of that and sensitive to that. And so we have been having a lot of conversations of what other ways can we try to provide opportunities, resources, help, assistance. Sometimes the biggest challenge is just getting folks to take advantage of those things, though. And again, I think for some people, they feel embarrassed. Like, if I accept this, it admits that I'm not a good parent or something. And that, you know, I think the secret is all of us could be better parents in some way.
Right.
And helping to get over that mental hurdle a little bit, to accept help, that hey, all of us need someone sometimes to come alongside us and offer support, guidance, advice. Being a parent is probably one of the most difficult jobs in the world for all of us. So
Right, and then no manual.
that's right. There's
they
no
say.
class, there's no manual, and every child is completely different.
Right.
And that's okay. But yeah, to me, again, in a perfect world, it would be wonderful to have those resources and have parents feel comfortable just accessing them whenever they needed to.
So one of the other aspects of the film that the students, that they discussed in the film, was that they had recommendations for families. And some of these recommendations, though they seem kind of obvious, you know, be open, be supporting of your child, be approachable to your child. Are there any other ways that, you know, that you've thought about when you saw the film that you think we could incorporate those messages somehow, like say in school programming in any ways?
I think most schools try really hard to offer programming, as you call it, you know, assemblies and group instruction. I mean, our school counselors go in and do classroom lessons with students, and I think those things do have value, but I will also be the first to tell you nothing carries the same weight as a one-on-one conversation or relationship with someone that you trust that is actually having that same conversation. Especially for children in that preteen and teenage years, you know, all of us went through that stage of life, and the last thing you want to hear is some person on the assembly stage telling you the big production and making the big deal about bullying or smoking or whatever the topic is. I mean, again, for a few students that resonates, but for many, the connection's not going to be there.
Right.
But when they have that trusted adult, trusted friend, mentor person, it's just a different conversation, I think. And for some kids, that might be a mom and dad. For some children, I think they do have that relationship at home, that they are open and comfortable enough to talk with mom and dad about tough subjects. But that's not always the case. And again, for many of us growing up, that probably wasn't the case. That wasn't our closest adult in those years, because those are the years we start rebelling or finding our own path. But for many students, that might be a coach, it might be a certain teacher, it might be another family member. And to me, the way I try to look at it is, no matter who it is, we just want to make sure that students feel like they have someone, whoever that person is. In the school setting, we try really hard to make sure our staff, A, know that we want to make sure every student feels heard and that they have a place, and B, if a student ever starts sharing things that are outside of your lane of expertise, the right venues of who to get them connected to for the right help. Most of us are not trained counselors. I'm a great listener, but there are subjects that if we start going that way, I need to help that child get to the help that they really need. So with that said, I actually found that to be one of the more impactful pieces of advice on the video, was that they were talking about that parents, please maintain those relationships, be open with your child, and that's easy to say, hard to do. And I know that as a dad myself and as someone who works with kids every day. But I would also tell you that is one of the most impactful, meaningful things, that if a child feels like, even if I mess up, even if I make a mistake or I get in a hard position, I have this person that I can go and seek help from.
It seems like just a simple fundamental statement.
Yes.
But it's very hard, I think, for some parents, or even if the parent is actually approachable, for the kid to realize that the parent is approachable.
Yes.
And in an ideal world, right, all parents would be approachable. But we know that's that's not always the case because
Sure.
as parents we have our own struggles that we're dealing with and may not respond in the best way for
Sure.
our kids.
Sure.
But it does bring me to another topic, though, that is interesting, I think, and that is this whole family effect of drug exposure that the interviews highlighted. And so in a school setting, it's intuitive, right, that if you know a kid was arrested or something, or a parent has conveyed to you, we think there might be a problem here. We don't want our child around this other child because of drugs. And that's something that I'm sure you probably, hopefully don't handle very often, like for the need of it, but,
Right.
but you're accustomed to understanding that those things might be happening.
Sure.
But the other part of it that the students sort of highlighted to me was the other effects, right? So let's say you have, let's say a child in high school, and maybe the parent has reached out in this sort of way to say, we have some concerns here, can you help us? But there's also a couple siblings in elementary school. And I think that's one of the things I really found really important is that the far-reaching effects of the family that's dealing with drugs, even if it's just this, looks like it's just this one child, but it has these other impacts on the siblings maybe, or even cousins, or other family members, even
Sure.
if they're like unrelated fictive kin living in the household. And so what are your thoughts about what schools might be able to do to, say, assist these other kids that the parent isn't reaching out to you about, because it looks like maybe they're not drug exposed or drug involved, and so that's not the issue for them, but we can tell from these interviews that those kids would potentially be negatively affected by the siblings' behavior.
So from the school's perspective, there's obviously a fine line that has to be watched with student confidentiality in all things. And even
Right.
within the household, those younger siblings may not be aware yet that there's an issue with the older sibling with drug use or
Yeah,
whatnot.
could
And
be.
so the best practice for school would be to certainly consult with the parents and say, hey, just checking in. We know that there are younger children in the home. Are you observing anything? If you are, make sure you let us know. Always try to keep parents at the table as much as possible so they are also a part
Right.
of what's going on and aware. Would never want to start
Oh, right.
counseling or working with the younger child and the parent not
Right.
be aware of that. But with that, I feel like most schools would probably take that approach that, hey, we know there are other children in this home. Are you seeing any issues? Are they whatever? Are you comfortable if our staff checks in with them once in a while just to
Right.
see how things are going? And I would say that's the case with any sort of trauma or
Exactly.
things like that.
Right.
I know we've done that many times in the past where an issue that doesn't even involve one child is happening. If we're made aware, we try to still make sure we're keeping an eye on that child. And if you start to notice any change, please say something so that we can help you along that
Exactly.
and come alongside you with that. So it gets more difficult if it's children outside of that home, because then
Sure.
from the school side, we may or may not even know there's any sort of a relationship there. It could be a
Right.
next door neighbor and they know all about it, but we don't know that they're next door neighbors.
Exactly.
One of the encouraging shifts that I think schools have been moving to, and our school's no exception, is, and this encompasses way more than just drug addiction or anything like this, but just that idea of, we're trying to teach the students especially that if you ever see, hear, experience, feel something that just doesn't feel right, tell someone, speak up, say something. And again, it's one of those very simple ideas,
Right.
but what an impact, right? Just, wow, this kid in my class, the last month, something's different. He hasn't acted like this all year.
Right.
Just let somebody know so they can check and see. And maybe everything's fine, but maybe not. And you might
Right.
be the reason that kid gets help because he was afraid to tell somebody what was going on.
Exactly.
And I think that applies here, in a case like this where, again, this may just be a student who rides the bus, doesn't even talk to the child,
Right.
but realizes this kid has just been acting really weird. Says something to the bus driver, who says something to the counselor, and then, help can be
Right.
on the way.
Right.
So,
Yeah, and so it kind of gets to your point, like taking it into the training for the teachers, training even for the bus drivers,
yeah.
and trying to, I guess I would say, create a higher level of sensitivity, maybe awareness or observation even about what we're seeing and how, even though this situation might be in the high school, we might have elementary school kids that are having some kind of negative response to it, might show up on a bus ride, actually, right? Because they're also enclosed in the bus. They're so close together, they would certainly see differences, I would think, in that environment. A school classroom is a bit different. It's so many more kids that are, you know, more, I guess I would say, in a system, right? So they're used to a daily routine. It might not surface quite so much right there.
Right.
But having that whole system approach to understanding what the needs of our kids might be and what drug exposure could cause, even in terms of what behaviors. Some kids will withdraw. Some kids will become more aggressive. And I think one of our interviews brought that out, is that they're going to react in different ways.
Right.
And there's no one way, there's no one thing that people could look for or try to observe. So you mentioned a little bit more about family, and it made me start thinking about how schools could incorporate more interaction with the family. It's very tough to do, like everyone's busy. And parents are working when the schools are operating for the most part. So that means they either have to take off work to be involved, or you have to have extra hours for staff to be there when the parents are available. So it's kind of complicated. I understand structurally it's complicated. But the other aspect of having parents involved relates to the overall wellness. You know, I know a lot of school systems are focusing on wellness. They have wellness weeks, you know, we have wellness events. And in that umbrella of wellness, we're talking about a lot of different things. And one of those items is destigmatizing mental health counseling, and also interventions related, you know, perhaps to drug exposure or drug usage. And so what do you think about, say, like having events that are not really designated for mental health counseling or related to drugs, but you have programming going alongside of the other programming at the same time? So if you're having a performance, I think you have chiming group or something in the elementary school. So you have a chimers performance, and then you could also have some other people available who are there for these other purposes, but yet it's available. It's not so obvious. So it's not like bringing parents in or bringing families in for the purpose of talking about drug exposure or drugs, because like you said, they're less likely to come in for that, because it's kind of exposing oneself, I guess, you know, to a problem in our family. But if you do this kind of co-programming, it might lend itself to more people having access to the literature or understanding what schools are offering that are for, you know, really literally designed to help families be healthier families. Have you been doing that, or how do you feel about that?
So we've actually talked a lot recently about trying some new things to re-engage and get folks back into the school. I don't know if you remember, you know, the last few years prior to the pandemic, we had totally re-energized the start of the year with a welcome back party every year at the first football game, just to get the community back to the school. You know, free food and activities going on for the kids, and it really was just an excuse to get everybody to come to school for a couple hours and see each other and spend some happy time. That they weren't doing work or anything serious. We were just here. And that was very well received. And I think we had a lot of folks come who don't normally come to school things because of that. And so that's actually caused us to think a little more about, is there a different approach? Like you said, maybe combine some things to get parents re-engaged with certain topics. Because in the past, what you shared is true. In the past, we've actually tried to host, you know, one time we planned an event specifically to give parents support and tools and resources on technology items. And we thought we had a great lineup of speakers and all these great topics, and we were so excited. And I think we had 8 parents show up out of the entire school district of 1,200 kids. So that was kind of a downer that night, because a lot of work went into that. But but you know, that was a lesson of, okay, that obviously wasn't something that was interesting enough or attractive enough to get folks in. And so we have talked about that maybe we can combine some other things that will draw people in and work in some other things. Hey, while you're here, take a look at this real quick. And get connected. So, yeah.
Yeah, the joint programming lends itself, I think, very well to being able to educate parents, but it's not the sole purpose of what they're doing there, or even the kids technically. So let's take, for example, guidance counselors are probably at this time of year meeting with students about what, maybe it's already done, I forget what time of year this is done, but anyway, planning for next year and what they're going to take. So that you could either co-train or cross-train staff potentially, so you do have someone who's there who's more trained with identifying drug-related issues, or is certainly maybe better trained in resources that are available in the community or something like that. But even if cross-training's not doable, because most people don't study two distinct fields, right? But even if that's not available, maybe having two people who are like the guidance counselor who's doing the academic course planning, and then also at the same time having available someone who is, we mentioned a little bit about mental health, because we know mental health use sometimes is related to seeking substance use. And so either trained with drug abuse or mental health counseling, kind of being operating in these meetings, just to say like, and how are these other things going? Have you given any thought, or what do you think of that idea?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good idea. Again, for us, it's just the planning and the engagement is always the big part, right? Of just getting folks there. I mean, and we are constantly now, and I will tell you, one of the things that we've also talked about recently is, after surviving 2 years of the pandemic and all the shifts that we had all around, we've also talked about, the world has learned to connect in some new ways too, virtually and through some other things. So are there maybe some other approaches that we could meet parents a little more on their time and their schedule? In the olden days, it was only 2 years ago, but parent-teacher conferences have looked the same for decades, right? It's always been the same structure, and we've talked about, would parents be more apt to participate and be a little more engaged with that if they could just connect? Maybe they could take their lunch break and just connect for 15 minutes and check in on some of these things and do some of that. So I think we're open to that, and we'll see if that helps. Because at the end of the day, like we said on some of the earlier topics, I think most parents really want to be involved and engaged. It's just gets difficult, and the older the children get, the harder it gets to be too. And we know that, and we want to do whatever we can to help them feel connected and have a presence and feel like, hey, I know what's going on between the hours of 8 and 3 with my child every day. So
So one of the other topics that was in here was, I think highlighted, was the variety of ages at which people were exposed to drugs. Some were basically as far back as they could recall, and then others were high school. So when we think about intervening or help guiding kids or families or being supportive, whatever the term is, when we think about that, some kids at elementary school age are very aware and are probably at very high risk because of that and higher increased awareness. And then other kids, maybe even in high school, have virtually no experience. So how does a school go about programming for these very different levels of involvement across all these ages?
It's very difficult. And there's always that fine line of, are we almost introducing ideas by talking too much about it if a child hasn't been exposed? And we certainly don't want that to happen either. But I will say, again, speaking specifically for our school district, our elementary counselor, I think, does a very nice job of having structured lessons where she tries to at least sprinkle in just some of those ideas of, and I think she tries to keep it general enough that, again, if something's ever happening that makes you uncomfortable, talk to a trusted adult, those kind of ideas, so that if there is a child who has a very specific issue, we can work very specifically with that issue, get DCS involved or whatever needs to happen. But I think one of the impactful things I took from that video was the student who shared their perspective on how they responded to the peer pressure that had been put on them, and the fact that they were glad they had kind of reflected on how to get out of the situation at the moment. And I think that some of their advice was, you know, helping other children have some of those tools beforehand before you find yourself in that situation and then don't know how to get out of it.
Exactly.
And I think that was great advice. That's advice that I have shared with students before of, you know, it's easier sitting here talking with me to talk about what would you do if, so that when the moment comes, you already kind of, oh yeah, I remember I'm going to say this or do this, versus, oh my gosh, I don't know what to say. I can't get out of this uncomfortable spot I'm in. And again, we're talking about drugs now, but that could be anything.
It's very transferable.
If you
skills,
have
right.
a friend who's asking you to shoplift at the mall,
Exactly.
or if
How do I get out of it?
they're driving too fast and you're not comfortable in their car
Right.
anymore, you know what?
Right.
How are you prepared to get out of a situation you're not comfortable being in, to keep yourself safe? So,
Right.
and to me, I think those are just good life skills, no matter what. I mean, that, I think as adults, a lot of us have some of those
Right.
skills on standby for a coworker puts you in a weird spot.
Exactly.
How do you get out of that situation,
Exactly.
right? So for me, that's kind of the approach that I know I took a lot when I was
Yeah.
more at the building level working with students, was just talking through some of those things, you know. It's always easier to have a plan ahead of time and never use it than wish you would have thought about it before you're in the moment and you have 10 seconds to do something,
Right.
to react.
So, in regard to some of the messages that they had for kids, do you have any programming in the school, or are you open or receptive to programming in the school that goes through kind of what you're talking about? Like, here's how we can create a scenario, and here's how we might be able to get out of it. Not necessarily role play, because I'm not sure how
Right.
receptive kids would be to that, although they might have fun with it, I don't know.
Sure.
But anything along those
Yeah,
lines?
so at our school, our guidance counselors do monthly guidance lessons with the various grade levels, and that's some of the content that they would cover. They talk through some of those kinds of things. I can't tell you in specific detail
that's-
right now exactly what they do,
Right.
but I know that's a big part of their lessons of, you know, trying to equip children with skills to how to react in a situation. And again, it runs the gamut over months of, you know, a child is saying mean things to you on the playground.
Right.
You know, okay, what are your options at that point? You know, how do you react? Here's the different ways. Let's think through what happens with each of these ways. And because obviously one option is to hit that child, but you
Right.
probably won't like what happens
After
next because
that.
you made a bad choice now in responding, but here's some other options that you could choose.
Right.
And again, same idea like we said a minute ago, much easier to just talk and think calmly in that setting versus when you're on the playground and that child comes up and puts you in that spot and everybody's watching and you're about to react.
Exactly.
What happens next? And so I think our counselors have done a nice job of being very deliberate and intentional with those lessons and trying to build those skills. And I think for a lot of kids, they're very successful. I've had students tell me, I remembered I was in this spot and I remembered we talked about it and I did this.
Yeah.
And I think, well, good job. I'm glad somebody is
Chalk it
hearing
up.
it. That's right. Good work. Does it work every time? Of
Right.
course not.
Right.
And even a student who's reflected on it may get in a spot that's so stressful, they still make a reaction that isn't the ideal one. But
Right.
but I really think, and I don't know that we're necessarily unique. I would imagine a lot of schools probably are trying their best to do those things. Where I think it gets difficult is sometimes, you know, the school may be putting all these things in place and doing this, but then there are other influencers at home, outside,
Sure.
maybe some of the media that our children are exposed to that are telling a very different story
Message, yeah.
or a different set of guiding principles of how we should react in those situations. And
Right.
that's confusing for a child, you know, when
Totally.
they hear this and this sounds great, but then I hear this and I feel pressured that, oh, I'm supposed to
Right.
be a man, right?
Right.
And
Stand up.
punch somebody or whatever, and that's difficult.
It is very difficult. So one other question relates to, like you mentioned, the guidance counselor. So in this film, it's people who are basically younger, more recently graduated from high school, I assume, the guidance counselor.
Right.
What do you think the advantages of doing something or using a film like the film these students have created to share with current, maybe high school students? I'm not sure this film would be appropriate for all age of kids.
Sure.
But what do you think about having panels like this one, or could be maybe even a panel of parents saying how they feel, like all different kinds of ways to send messages about kids, about how to react, what are escape routes. You know, one of the students mentioned, here's how I escaped. I ran out, literally ran out.
Sure.
And other ways that people, some were strong and just said no and refused, even under peer pressure. But how do you think the difference might be if schools were offering actual young people coming in, more recent grads, let's put it this way, to come in and send these kinds of messages?
I think there's value in that. Again, just from my experience, I feel like students are most receptive and the message clicks most when it is someone that they are having, I don't want to say completely individual, because it doesn't necessarily have to be totally one-on-one, but still someone that they have enough of a trust or relationship with or buy-in with that the message is received.
Right.
You know, just being very honest, even though I run a school that still does assemblies and presentations on things,
Exactly.
I don't pretend to think that every kid goes to a bullying presentation and bullying is solved. It doesn't.
Right.
And in fact, in some cases, I would say it may even feed the problem a little bit because of the way some of the kids hear the message when they leave, and that's difficult. It's very difficult. And so I think the more that a strategy can find a way to actually get that connection with the child or group of children, the more receptive and valuable that is going to be. And again, with the right approach, I think a panel of individuals closer to their age is probably, there's some power in that because they feel a little more like, ooh, they're
They can
almost,
relate a little.
they're almost in my generation.
Yeah.
You know, I get what they're saying. I think the approach of the people speaking would carry a lot of weight too. If it's very preachy or just, well, here's what I did, and I mean, you know, as humans, we kind of tune that stuff out. I think a lot.
I think
well,
so.
good for you. And I feel like that was. I feel like someone in the video alluded to that. I don't remember exactly what the example was, but one of them spoke to the idea that, you know, be real about it. Don't act like you're the perfect parent.
Right.
When you probably had your own challenges, and you know, opening up to your kid makes them see that, hey, my mom and dad also had some things, and I firmly think that's good advice. You know, that's none of us have had nothing but smooth sailing through life, and we've all had.
Sadly, that's a fact.
Yeah, I mean, different challenges. Not everyone has struggled with drugs or even had
Right.
temptations with substances over the years and things. I don't pretend like we've all had those same experiences, but at the same time, all of us have had challenges somewhere with something and setbacks, and I think it's important. That's what makes us human, and you know, having that connection with your own children or with a child that you know, or even other adults, I think is powerful. So
one of the goals of this project was to get people thinking more, maybe refresh, if you will. Not that we haven't done a lot of thinking on the topic, but to refresh the facts and the realities and the difficulties that the kids are going through related to drugs. So do you feel this film has contributed to that for you? Has it made you pause and say, well, maybe if we try these things, or to kind of have a more expanded view, or even just a refreshed, more sensitive view of this topic?
I would say for me, refreshed is probably the best approach. I'll say unfortunately, because that's probably the way I think about it. Unfortunately, the kinds of stories they share are not foreign to me in my line of my profession. You know, these are the things that we deal with probably almost daily in some way, shape, or form with some of the children that we serve. And that's just, again, I don't think that's unique to our school corporation. I think that's every corporation in the United States in some capacity, some more than others. But you know, it is there. But in a way, it was refreshing in a way to hear some success stories of students who had really gone through that and come out the other side, and now had kind of a chance to reflect on that, share some advice, think about what helped them get through those challenging things, because there's the tough part. It's impossible to know when you're currently working with a child and trying your best to help. It's impossible to know if you're saying the right things or doing the right things, or and what works in one situation is not going to work in another. That's just,
Right.
we're humans. And
So one student had said, it might seem like drugs are cool, but it's going to be a much more cool with you having a diploma with your name on it.
Absolutely.
And I think that that's really true, is that right now these things seem cool, but in the long run, over the course of your life, this is not really where you need to be. We need to be focusing on these other activities.
Right.
So,
And today, you know, in previous generations, I think, you know, smoking was the big thing.
right,
I'm not sure how many kids smoke anymore,
Right.
but e-cigarettes and Juuls and all that are the
Right.
that's the new smoking. That is the new thing that,
Right.
that has taken the world by storm, I suppose, to much to the not betterment of our children.
Right.
And so, and I feel like 10 years from now, there'll probably be something new. I mean, it's just a cyclical thing. I think since
Right.
the dawn of time, kids have wanted to rebel a little bit and find their path, and that's part of growing up and going through that. But obviously that was great wisdom in the video too, that, you know, when you have the benefit of hindsight, you realize those things that felt so important in that moment were definitely not important.
Right.
And the things you will want to be remembered for and achieve are these other things that at the time may not feel like the cool things or the exciting things, but they are what are really going to matter 5 years from now. So,
perfect.
yeah.
Well, I appreciate your time and insights. Is there anything else that you'd like to share or talk about?
I don't think so. Just thanks for chatting.
All right. So thank you for joining us. So it's been very important, I think, for us to reflect on what the students put together. And hopefully, you know, if you have any interest in working with any of these students, you can reach out to them too, or through me, and we can try and help you develop whatever programming you want to develop in the school system.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.